My name is Marija Jakovljević. I'm Serbian feminist, and I'm happy and honored to be part of Feminist Kitchen for the second time. My work sits at the intersection of peace building, feminism, human and environmental rights, and solidarity economy. We have few amazing guests to support us from different perspectives. We have Vicky Blake, an activist in the university and college union at Leeds University, UCU branch Honorary Secretary and member of the Committee of the Abortion Rights Campaign from the UK. We also have Julie Ward, an activist and member of the National USC Committee and former Labour Party member of the European Parliament. And we have also Oksana Dutchak, researcher, Marxist feminist, co-editor of the online journal Commons, joining us from Ukraine. And we also have Viktoriia Cherniakhivska, who is our artist and who will bring some magic into the space, because during the session, you will also have opportunity to learn a bit about specific artistic angle of Ukrainian culture. And while we are untangling this not so nice and shiny topic currently, Viktoriia will bring us some lightness into the room. So I invite you all to also engage with the artistic part of this session while we all of us are in this virtual kitchen. So now I'll give a few minutes to each of our participants to present themselves, and then we will go deeper into many questions that we have on our table. So I'll first invite Vicky to tell us a bit more about her work, her context, and things that she thinks are important to share with us in regards to this topic. Vicky, floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you so much for organising this event and for having us here together. It's where to start, isn't it? So I as you said, I'm activist in the University and College Union in the UK, which we represent members who work in universities and also in further education colleges, which can teach people from, anything from 14 up to adulthood. And there's around about 120,000 members in our union across the UK. And we have had some recent wins and we've had some recent challenges. I've been involved in UCU for a really long time. I joined, I think it was just over 15 years ago. And I'm very involved in my branch, and I'm also very involved nationally. I've been president of our union nationally before, a couple of years ago. And it's very difficult to kind of sum up what that means to me about my context, if you like, but it dominates a lot of my life. I feel like when I'm not working and when I'm not sleeping, I'm doing trade union activism. And even when I'm trying to rest, it's still here with me, and I'm still thinking about how that connects to different things, and thinking about how that connects to how we need to pursue social justice in different spheres. So as you said in the introduction, I'm also on the executive of the abortion rights campaign here, and we do have we're making real efforts to increase our trade union representation and participation in those spaces. Traditionally, that was really important, and there's almost a feeling that, like, oh well, we're okay on that front, and actually there's increasing threats and there's a lot going on legally here at the moment, as there is across the world. And so one of the reasons I'm so glad to be here with all of you is that one of the gifts of being able to get involved in my union has been the political education that it made space for me to kind of have, and not just to me, but kind of to experience different things and talk to different people. And getting more of an internationalist perspective has been really important part of that for me. And that's also the case within the abortion rights work that I'm involved in. And one of the things I've been thinking about recently, and just really interested to hear what others think, is how we can connect the importance of local and community activism with that kind of broader understanding of how we all connect together and how that can inform our internationalist perspectives as well. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing all that experience and questions to the room. I'll now invite Julie to share about herself and her work and the energy and the interest that she comes with.
Okay, well, I'm really super glad to be here as well. I was for 5.5 years a member of the European Parliament, representing the Labour Party in the northwest of England, and that included the huge cities of Manchester and Liverpool, but it's one of the biggest regions. It also includes many rural areas and lots of areas of deprivation. And while I was in the European Parliament, I was on the Culture and Education Committee and also the Women's Rights and Gender Equality Committee. But before my time in the European Parliament, I worked in the culture and education sector, primarily as an artist, as a poet and a theatre maker. I always feel that I've been somewhat an accidental politician because I never thought that people like me could do it. But I was very proud of my record in the Parliament because I think what I did was to, roll up my sleeves and use the opportunity presented to me wholeheartedly and like really, really work hard to try and improve life for, for the most marginalized people. But my interest in Ukraine goes back to 2011 when I was really lucky to be involved in a pan-European cultural management exchange project, which enabled me to work with Ukrainian partners and partners also in Moldova over the course of a year to learn about Ukrainian culture and to work together, actually. And we organized so I worked with a music festival in Lutsk, but I also was on as kind of organizational group for a festival at the end of the program. So I traveled a lot more widely in Ukraine at that point and learned about the culture and met amazing women. That is like my biggest memory about being in Ukraine, is just meeting really amazing women who do it, working in lots of different spheres within society, but really motivated. And so when I was elected, I had no parliamentary responsibility for Ukraine, but I made my first parliamentary speech about Ukraine. And as soon as you say anything in the plenary, all the different ambassadors and all the different lobby groups, they're all listening. Who is going to be the person who is going to speak for us? So I became somebody who was prepared to speak up for Ukraine, who knew something about Ukraine and could speak with and could speak about the country and the challenges and its people, from a position of knowledge. And that meant that I also traveled to Ukraine quite a bit during my mandate, but nothing to do, always outside of my responsibilities. So, for example, I opened a hospital in Ivankiv, just south of Chernobyl, for the victims of the disaster, of the nuclear disaster. I was really active on the campaign to free Oleg Sentsov, the filmmaker. I worked closely with an amazing Ukrainian woman who was running kind of leadership and social enterprise projects for other women right across Ukraine. And I've continued to maintain those connections and contacts. So I'm not an MEP anymore, but I'm still an activist. And some people say, well, you could retire now, but actually, how can you possibly retire when there is so many things that we need to do in the world? So I found myself, Brexit was the end of my parliamentary career in Europe, but actually it isn't the end of my activism. And I found, because really of the terrible things that are happening here in UK, and Vicky will know what I'm talking about, like, 13 years of Tory austerity, which has made life really, really difficult for women. The 13 years of Tory austerity and the horrendous situation for refugees and asylum seekers here has made me become be really active on the ground in campaigns back home. So I'm now one of the key people in a campaign to shut down a horrendous detention centre, which is near where I live, which is a detention centre just for women. And all these women are traumatised by their journeys to reach safety. But I'm also really active in the Ukraine Solidarity campaign. So thank you. And just wonderful to be with a group of women, with a theme of cooking and a theme of art and a theme of feminism. It's just kind of like everything. It's like a dream. So thank you.
Thank you, Julie. I'll now invite Oksana Dutchak to share about herself.
Good evening, everybody. I think for majority it's evening. Thank you for inviting, for organizing, and for those who joined today. So my name is Oksana Dutchak. I'm a Marxist feminist. I'm also a researcher most of the time. I mostly research labor in its various aspects, but I'm interested particularly in female labor, both paid and unpaid. And as a researcher, I mostly study so-called female or traditionally female sectors of economy, so those sectors where women are concentrated for various reasons, and those sectors which are mostly also supporting women in the society, like healthcare, education, social work, elder care, and so on. Currently, I work on a project. It's an international project in different countries. We do the Ukrainian case. It's on transnational care chains in elder care, so about migrants, for example, from Ukraine, who usually women, predominantly women, who go to other European countries, farther to the west, and care for elderly people there. While in Ukraine, the elderly care system is in very, very extremely poor conditions. So we are trying to build this bridge between the migration trajectory and their choices of care, of conditioned choices of care arrangement. So which options do they have themselves if they would need care in the future, which options they have for their relatives who need care in the context of Ukrainian, again, very bad elderly care system, and now also a full-scale invasion, destruction, and everything involved. That's one of my main activities. Another is, as was mentioned, I'm co-editor of Commons, and I usually use this notion of co-editor because we have more relatively horizontal structure in Commons Journal, and so I'm one of the editors who work there, and there we also try to cover various topics related to leftist progressive position, which is including feminist topics, so the situation of women, and also LGBTIQ people, ethnic minorities, and so on. And also, of course, the situation of workers, labor struggle, students struggle in education sector. So we are trying to both look critically on the processes happening in Ukraine, and and you don't need much to pursue them critically because they are very sad now. The processes are very sad from the progressive perspective, and we're also trying to give voice to people who are representing these groups, or people who struggle for the rights of these various groups in the situation where there's the current conditions are deteriorating. As for this event, to link somehow to my activities, additionally link it, I think I'm explicitly very much interested in the question of solidarity on various levels. starting from the everyday solidarity between women who have care responsibility. That was one of the things with which I was fascinated when I was myself as a refugee in Germany for more than 1 year, when I was observing when women were recreating their networks, which they lost because of the forced displacement, but they still needed somebody to support them, and they were building these networks of everyday solidarities between themselves, basically often from scratches. So this, like, starting from this very usual or naturalized solidarity of everyday life, and going to workers' solidarity, solidarity in labor struggle, and international solidarity, of course, also, because solidarity, and that's why I'm also interested in communicating and talking with people, because solidarities are definitely built on connections and dialogues. And I think that the notion of dialogue is also crucial for me and for Commons also in this respect. So I'm happy to be here. I think it will be very interesting for all of us and productive to exchange experiences and perspectives.
Thank you so much. Appreciate such nuanced and rich experience, and so many questions that you interconnect. And finally, I will invite Viktoriia to present herself. Viktoriia is our artist and poet, and she will guide us through artistic part of this session. So she will also give us a brief introduction why we are doing what we are going to do today, and why it is important for her. Thank you.
So hello to everyone. Thank you for the chance to be here with you today. And so I'm Viktoriia. I'm a Ukrainian poet, artist, and book illustrator. And my main technique, my main instrument is work in Adobe Photoshop, digital collage. And if you do this creative activity today, from your pictures, I will also make a collage, like, as a result. And today, like previous time, on the previous meeting, we were welcoming spring while drawing birds. Today, we will talk about willow, because willow is verba. Is in Ukrainian, it is verba, so it is important tree for Ukraine. And there is even a saying, без верби калини нема України, like, without a viburnum and without a willow, there's no Ukraine. I hope that Ukraine always will be, but today we will try to make more willows, like to make Ukraine stronger too, because people believed that willow is a magic tree, and it had a lot of symbols, like it was a tree that can grow 700 branches and 700 like flowers, these seals, willow seals or catkins, and at the same time, it was covering a lot of symbols and about like big family, but at the same time, infertility, because willow has no fruits on it. And also it was a symbol of, it could be seen as a sky where a sun lives. At the same time, it was sometimes compared to a sun, like branches, like sun rays. And also it could be seen as a woman or as a sad girl. And also there was such a comparison, like a girl as a willow branch, like where you put a branch, it grows anyway. The same, like a girl had this, she had to do it in what family a girl was put after marriage, like she had to grow there in that family. So I propose you to make today Vytinanka. It's a name of Ukrainian technique, traditional. It's like a paper cutout. I will show you and I will say what we need today. Like this, this is something like what we are going to create today. So what we need today for creative part, and I'm not going to distract you very much from the serious topic of this discussion, just like a background, just we are listening, but at the same time, hands are working. So we need a sheet of paper, then we need a pen and scissors, and that's all. If you don't like to cut out anything, you may just draw. So drawing is okay. But if you have time and inspiration, you can cut out. So what we do? We take a piece of paper, fold it in half, and then on this, in the center, like it was folded, right? And here we draw something like this. Willow branches. And what is black? Like I draw on one part of the paper. And then we fold it and we cut out everything that is black. And then we get this cutout that is named Vytynanka. And we have our own willow seals. So that's all what I invite you to do and send to the chat, and then it will be a collage. Thank you.
We will start with situation in Ukraine. So I'm inviting Oksana to share a brief overview, very brief overview, given the time restriction, of the situation regarding labor rights and economic justice now. Like, based on your research, what was the situation prior to the war? What changed during the war? Who is protecting workers' rights now? Any other input that you want to share for this intro point?
Thank you, Maria. So I will start now. I think I will cover briefly two topics. One is which is my research focus and of which I know the most, the infrastructure of care, so healthcare, social work, elderly care, and all these things which are important for women, both because they mostly work there. According to statistics, now 27% of Ukrainian employed women are employed in healthcare and education. And it's also important for them because they are also those who, due to gender inequality, are supported by this sector in their care work. And also I will cover the topic of labor regulation during the war, because it's, of course, extremely important for the population in general. So I would say that the word austerity was already mentioned here, and it is also key to understand things which have been happening in Ukraine for the past 10 years, starting from 2014. Though they didn't start it in 2014, they started before. And for example, if you check the statistics about this care facilities, schools, kindergartens, healthcare institutions, so on, you see that they were already cutting these facilities before 2014. They were calling it optimization. So like due to lack of resources, we want to use them more effectively, efficiently, and so we are closing those facilities which are not that effective, and which usually meant that they were closing facilities in rural settings, making like this spatial inequality also prominent, because people in rural settings were losing access to those facilities. So these cuts, they were happening before 2014, but with the annexation of Crimea and with the beginning of war in eastern Ukraine and the spiraling crisis of economy, they implemented a classical neoliberal austerity cuts, trying to, in their opinion, to stop the crisis or to halt it, which was all this package you perfectly know about. It was about freeze in minimum wage, freeze in social standards, and cuts in public sectors, both in public administration, but also in all this healthcare, education, and so on, which are in Ukraine still predominantly public facilities. So they continued, though they were not that much speaking about optimization. Of the difference after 2014, what happened, instead of doing the optimization, like this cuts by bit, they were starting to implement the holistic reforms in the sectors. And these reforms were really marketed. So it was classical marketization, not in a sense that they privatized everything, all these facilities in healthcare and education and so on, but they were trying to introduce the market mechanisms in functioning of those sectors. So like all the ideas about money following people, we are not paying for walls, but we are paying for services which are provided. So all the narrative about about educational services, healthcare services. So it substituted the narrative about the rights. So the rights of people to access this healthcare, education, and so on. So this was a very, these reforms were classical neoliberal reforms also, and they covered basically all the so-called social sectors, and had its implications for women both working there, but also women who are trying to get support from these sectors. And these implications were, of course, not positive. And adding to this, like the displacement of population, which was already happening there due to the war in eastern Ukraine, and some destruction happening, and so on. So it all had a negative influence, and disproportionate negative influence on women in Ukraine. Yeah, with the beginning of the full-scale invasion, on the top of that you have destruction of a huge scale caused by Russian shelling. For example, according to the data available, 12% of education facilities and 14% of healthcare facilities are either damaged or destroyed in Ukraine. And like among schools, for example, only 1/3 of schools are operating properly now, meaning offline, and only half of kindergartens. Like there are huge territories mostly in eastern and southern part of the country where no schools and no kindergartens work because it's not safe to work. So this all kind of had, again, a huge impact on the families, and especially on women in those families who have now have additional load of care work. Yeah, and also freeze of minimum wage, relative freeze of minimum wage and social standards still there, like despite inflation, despite everything, like nothing has changed here. At the same time, with the full-scale invasion, government finally did what they have been dreaming about, various governments in Ukraine, all governments in Ukraine, about dreaming about deregulation of labor. I came to activism myself nearly 2007, and one of the first protests I participated was a protest against attempts to deregulate labor, to implement the new labor code. So it was there. This attempts were already there in 2007 with a totally different government. After that, governments changed several times, but attempts to deregulate labor have always been there, and they finally did it in 2022, justifying it by the full-scale invasion of Russia and the necessities of the wartime and so on. So what they did, just some points, they simplified implementation of fixed-term contracts, which were until then quite restricted in Ukraine. So you could not, like usually we had termless contracts, and they introduced easier fixed-term contracts. A worker can be transferred to another work without their consent. The employer can change the substantial working conditions without prior notification of worker. A person can be fired while being on vacation or on health leave and without consent from the union. Increase in working hours from 40 regular working hours per week to 60 now, and less restriction on overtime. No additional holidays during the national celebrations, and so on. As for women, for example, additionally, they lifted the restriction on night shifts for pregnant women and on night shifts and overtime for women with small children. They also the employer can now cancel separate provision in collective agreements just because he wants or she wants. We have shorter vacations also, and so this all things, it puts like additional, like lifting the limit of exploitation to a great extent, and also limiting the power of the union, which they had before. which is very unfortunate. And of course, part of this is presented as a temporal measure due to war, but first of all, we don't know when the war will be over. And secondly, we know that very often these temporal restrictions or changes, they become very permanent, especially taking into account how our government was trying to push them for years. Who is protecting the situation of workers? I mean, it's usual suspects, nothing new here. So we have trade unions, though some of them are not quite independent, but we also have independent trade unions. We have different NGOs which are labor-oriented and try to support labor and to somehow either individually on a collective level trying to criticize what is done by the government and so on. Yeah, so these are usual suspects. We have some newly emerging unions, like for example, we have the trade union of nurses, a grassroots union, which was a kind of more non-institutionalized movement before, but they managed to register a union recently and so on. So this is a kind of classical actors, so who are involved in labor, in protecting labor. The problem is, of course, that they now operate in totally different circumstances than before the full-scale invasion, and it changes a lot, both in terms of resources which they have, but also in terms of that there is very limited space for public protest due to war and restrictions which imposed by the government because of the full-scale invasion by Russia. So yeah, they are doing what they can do, but of course with in totally different circumstances, which are harder for any struggle, including labor struggle.
I invite Julie to give us her reading of the situation as a former Labour Party member in the European Parliament. And as you are involved in many workers' rights and feminist and international campaign, what is your analysis of the current landscape in Europe and what we can expect after the elections for European Parliament in June? Do you see any shifts towards left and a bit more progressive and better consolidated resistance to what has been going for a decade and more? Or do you see more shifts on the right? So what is your perspective?
And I think it's important to clarify a few things about Europe and European institutions, because Europe means different things to different people in different contexts. Yes, there's the EU, which is now a bloc of 27 member states since the UK left, but we've also got wider Europe geographically, and we've got the Council of Europe, an intergovernmental organisation consisting of 46 member states, and that includes both the UK and Ukraine, Russia's membership having ended in March 2022. And in fact, Belarus has not been a member, has never been invited to join. And I'm going to talk about both the Council of Europe and the EU because there's some crossover. And in fact, the Council of Europe, I think at the minute is giving a kind of a sort of fairer assessment of where we are. According to the Council of Europe, the fulfillment of the human rights of women is still lagging in Europe. Discrimination on the grounds of gender and sex remains widespread and has been exacerbated by the economic crisis and austerity measures adopted in some European states, which have impacted women disproportionately. And this kind of narrative never makes it into Ursula von der Leyen's speeches, okay? So it's important, you know, it's good looking elsewhere. And the Council of Europe also recognises that women's rights are being threatened by the resurgence of reactionary trends targeting women who try to move out from their subordinated role in which they've been kept for centuries. And that is Council of Europe language. So it's quite useful for us all to know this. Another issue of concern is the intensification of hate speech against women in Europe, especially in the online world. And I would say particularly against Muslim women. And I have many Muslim women friends, and the rise of Islamophobia has been quite appalling, actually. And made many of them afraid, and many of them who are in political life have actually stepped back. discrimination and hate speech against women provide fertile grounds for violence against women, which is one of the most extreme human rights violations suffered by women. And the Council of Europe believes that the response of national authorities, including police, prosecutors and judges, remains inadequate in a great number of cases of violence against women. The Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women, which is known as the Istanbul Convention, has entered into force for a number of member states and the Council of Europe, i.e. the EU. And the Council of Europe has its own gender equality strategy and recently adopted a new strategy which focuses on 6 areas. And I won't say what they are. I think they're all the things that we would all want, okay? Just say that. Regarding the EU, even despite the really difficult challenges, the EU is still considered one of the world's most advanced political systems with regard to the promotion of gender equality. And the EU has been able to impose on member states a series of norms and values that are higher in effect than those in most countries. And it has offered a kind of welcoming environment for feminist mobilization. And gender equality is enshrined in the treaties, which means that legislation, gender mainstreaming, and specific measures for empowerment of women actually exists. And there has been, as I said, some progress. Again, I won't say what that is. I think we all know what we stand to lose if things go backwards. What I did want to say, though, is that the new strategy, the current strategy for gender equality in the EU and the Council of Europe's new strategy for gender equality, both do 2 things which never happened before. And one of those is to recognise that gender mainstreaming is a really important policy tool. And 2, that intersectionality is also really important. And I have been really pleased to see both those things used at policy making and legislative and at policy level, and it doesn't exist in the British Parliament. So the work that I did in the Fem Committee in the European Parliament always feels much more progressive than the work which is happening in the British Parliament regarding making policy and law for women's rights. We all know what's happening with the Istanbul Convention. It actually has entered into, it's now entered properly into the EU, even though not all EU member states have ratified it. And in fact, the UK only ratified it in 2022, I think. And I have some theories about this. I think that, it's easy to sign a convention, but actually what you then need to do is implement it. Then you need to monitor it and you need to give it a budget line. And because so many current countries were using austerity measures, the last thing that they wanted to do was to give more money for programs for women's rights, and certainly not for, so lots of things like women's refuges and legal aid for women, all these things were taken away or were reduced. So finally, to answer your question about the prediction for the next European Parliament, it's not looking very good. It looks as if progressives will lose seats, and the right, and particularly the far right, will gain seats. And what this could mean to women's rights and gender equality is really serious, because we know about the attacks, for example, on the Istanbul Convention by Hungary, Poland, Bulgaria. Other countries like Slovakia haven't ratified it. And these attacks and other attacks on all our rights, I think will be more prevalent. And also the attacks on non-binary people. So the LGBT plus community, which has never really been given equal rights by at European level. I mean, it still doesn't exist. That's also something which will be really, really under attack. So I think it's going to be really, really tough in the next parliament. And what that means is that we all have to galvanize ourselves, and support and try and support in some way or other those progressive MEPs who come into the parliament and are prepared to put up a fight. Men and women, by the way.
So I will invite Vicky to offer some examples and explanation, like to tell us a bit about union voices in support of Ukraine, because I want to build on this picture, like we have understanding of what's happening locally in Ukraine, we have this overview on the European level, and we want really to dive into this international solidarity perspective. So if you can tell us a bit more about what's happening in UK that relates to Ukraine in terms of solidarity and support.
Thank you. It's a really difficult thing to just sum up, and I don't know how many people here have seen some of the coverage that kind of was on social media and things last summer, of my union, UCU's annual congress, where we come together and make policy decisions. There was a lot of upset about, there were two motions passed in relation to Ukraine. One was, emphasizing solidarity work and ways that we can build our support, and that did pass. And there was another which some of the content just was very, I think, at odds with the kinds of requests that are being made by our comrades in Ukraine. And I think the picture varies across different unions, but we are dealing with this kind of narratives around war and about the basis of the full-scale invasion, which have become really difficult for people to discuss, and it's become more complicated as time has gone on. So I'm part of a group. I was a founding member of a group of UCU members in my union who we established a group. It's quite informal, but there were about 300 of us who signed a letter, and we're working to organise more. So I hope to have more news on how that's going after this year's Congress. But we formed a group called UCU Members for Ukraine, and really just trying to challenge some of the narratives around how we can best support our trade union comrades and the people of Ukraine in terms of how to uphold principles of self-determination, and to differentiate what is happening from a kind of an oversimplified version of that story, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of people who, when they hear messages like "we need to stop the war," we need there to be peace, that on that very simple level, it's very easy to feel, yes, we agree. And then, because war is, it feels, I think, from here to a lot of people, maybe it feels quite remote and it feels quite scary, and it feels like an easy thing that you should be able to say, yes, we want the war to stop. And I think that has kind of masked some of the discussions that need to be had about what solidarity looks like. And last year I was at the Women's TUC conference, where we were joined by a number of speakers from Ukraine, and online and in person. And we were talking about how to build solidarity in our movement in the UK in a practical way that helped promote better understanding of not only what's happening right now, but of the historical context to this full-scale invasion, and to how we can be a proactive part of supporting the kind of future that will be a more progressive Ukraine, thinking about rebuilding and thinking about opportunities to rebuild in a way that doesn't continue down the line that we were hearing about just now, of the erosion of labor rights and everything else. And I think, sorry, I'm trying to do this quickly and it's really hard. This is, I suppose, my perspective on it. I think there are a lot of people who don't really understand. They see stuff on the news, they feel bad about what's happening in the world. They are engaging to a degree, but there's a lot happening in people's lives in terms of like poverty, the deepening cost of living crisis, attacks on jobs, attacks on trade unions, and it makes it very difficult to have the kind of conversation that allows for people to explore and to hear things that might change their mind, or to ask questions in a way where they feel safe to do so. And I think that's a big part of what's been happening. So the debate that we had at our Congress last year became quite heated with these differing interpretations. And so one of the things that UCU Members for Ukraine has been trying to do, and we've been working with the Ukraine Solidarity Campaign to do this, is to put on a series of online webinars to try to bring people together to learn about different aspects of what's happening at the moment. So we had a webinar that looked at the reality of working in higher education in Ukraine right now, in the context of war. We have held one around the history of Ukraine. We are looking to hold a webinar on the economy, and just trying to create spaces for people to learn and to exchange and to understand as we move towards the next time that we come together to make our policy. So it's a really, I feel in many ways really upset when I talk about it, because I wish it was as simple as we come into this space and we listen to our Ukrainian trade union comrades and ask, what do you need? And then we do everything that we can to do that. And that's not the situation across the board. There are unions who are doing loads of work to fundraise and to put things together. And that's, you know, I'm not saying it's the same everywhere, but there is this tension around what is underlying the war and understandings of the politics around it. And for me, and I didn't really do a very good job of introducing myself, I'm sorry, but for me, I'm not an academic. I work in a university. I work with young people who are considering going to university from less privileged backgrounds. And for me, looking at this situation, I always want to try to go like back to the basics and the practicalities of solidarity. And I feel like if we can connect people and we can bring about spaces like this one, actually, but where we can bring about spaces where our members and members in unions that maybe are having the same debates can hear directly from people who are in Ukraine or who have had to leave Ukraine, but to hear the reality of the situation and to explore that and to just, you know, really feed that into what we can do in terms of practical solidarity work is so important. The work that we've been doing as UCU Members for Ukraine is to try to make that more accessible. And one thing I would like to just sort of throw out there while I'm here is that if there's anyone here who would be interested in contributing to a webinar online, what we do is we hold them live, but we record them so then they can be watched back later. So it makes it more possible for people to engage if they couldn't attend at the time. There is a really confusing mixture of perspectives on what's happening in Ukraine and where the answer might lie. And the only way that I think that we're going to make it through that confusion is to create space for people to educate each other, like peer to peer, you know, not just kind of lecturing or telling people how it is. It's to try to hear where people are coming from and understand why they've got the questions and concerns that they have, but to open up access to those other perspectives to them. I think there are probably academics who would express this in a more formal way. But to me, if you can make really clear to people how they can help in a way that they can understand and feels accessible and possible, I believe the best out of people. I think they will always want to. What has happened in some of the debates that we've had more recently has been that it's kind of been quite abstracted. It's been quite removed from that reality. And I'm just very keen that we try to do more of this work to understand and do kind of cultural exchange and reality exchange and listen to each other, to build a better, sort of more robust form of solidarity, you know. So I'll finish on saying I myself used to think of myself as, I'd like to be a pacifist, and I don't think I really was, but I felt like that would be a good thing to be. So I feel like I understand something of where people are coming from when they are concerned about the general concept of arms and weapons and war. I am too. It's a horrible industry. But there is an issue when you are kind of taking that perspective and just hoping that by magic this situation will be okay if we just talk about peace. Like, it's not something that's just going to happen, and there is a reality to what you're facing in Ukraine that I find it difficult to wrap my head around, and I think that is part of the problem here. I think there is this abstraction and this distance, and so I really hope that the group that we formed, connected to my union, and I'd be very interested in talking to people who are doing similar things, can do something about that.
I'll briefly invite Viktoriia to bring a bit more lighter energy, because I understand that this is very heavy issue for all of us, particularly that many people are living through it right now.
So our ancestors, as they noticed that willow grows very quickly, they believed that people can get this energy too. And for example, when Baba Povetucha, who was midwife in the villages, when she helped to give a birth to a child, she could wash these willow branches in water and washed her hands in this water, saying as quickly willow grows, the same quickly the child grows. And for example, there is a church holiday named Verbna Nedelya, Willow Sunday. In the world it is Palm Sunday, but as we don't have palms in Ukraine, so people used willows and use willows, and it will be in April in Ukraine, and people take this branches of willow and go with them to the church so these willows will be blessed. And there is a funny phrase like "ne yab'yu verba b'ye." People were slightly beating each other with these branches and saying, "I don't beat you, the willow beats you." And it was not like a aggression. It was just an impulse to give energy and health of the willow, and it was a wish, let you be as healthy as a willow. And also people believed that willow could protect them from a lot of things, like from devil, from the storm. For example, when there was a storm, bad weather, and people could burn these branches and say, as the smoke from the branches disperse, the same way let these clouds also go away. And what else? Willow is very magic, so again, let's do it and draw it. I'm in the process. I do it very slowly.
I would like us to look a bit into the future, because this has to end at one point, and we are going to have say in that. So I'm inviting Oksana to guide us there. So I know it feels that we might be far from that, and I know that we all, in all the countries where we are coming from, are experiencing these pressures from international institutions demanding austerity measures for their limited support. And Ukraine for sure is experienced and will experience this pressure further in process of rebuilding itself. So, but let's think how to rebuild Ukraine and how to ensure some decent level of labor rights and economic justice for people of Ukraine. So what you would say that should be priority in terms of defending labor rights in Ukraine at this moment, how to mobilize people, and how to move forward, what you need, what you lack, how to get there. I know it's super difficult, but honestly, we need to start. If we do not have specific strategies, let's start with dreaming.
Well, I mean, I'm not the best person to answer this question. I have very big problems with utopian visions and visionism, visionary in general, I must say. But I will try to answer. So, of course, first of all, what we need is peace, preferably just and sustainable peace. This is the thing which is a precondition for any socioeconomic justice in Ukraine in the future. And because it is so hard to understand when and how the war will end, it's really also hard to project anything positive, any positive, even negative scenarios are hard to project. But what we need to have socioeconomic justice in a hypothetical situation when we are at the point of reconstructing the country, I think one of the first things we need is a political will. And unfortunately, this is what is dramatically lacking now. So we obviously see that our government is predominantly neoliberal. I mean, of course, there are different fractions in government, different variations of, I don't know, different options of populism and so on, but predominantly it's a neoliberal government. And what is worst, that from the outside it also pressed in the direction of this austerity, neoliberalism, and so on. It has always been like this for the recent decades, but the problem is this: now Ukraine is extremely dependent on West, like existentially dependent on West in terms of economy, in terms of everything. Which means that this is like West will have a lot to say in how Ukrainian future will look like. And the tragedy of failure to provide international solidarity to Ukrainian struggle, at least on the side of European parliamentary leftists, is precisely that because they're so obsessed with the idea of stop supplying weapons to Ukraine or keeping kind of neutrality, that they do not engage in any substantial talk with any actors in Ukraine. In the end, they do not have anything to say in relation to how Ukrainian reconstruction will look like. So the European parliamentary leftists who could potentially have influence on how a Ukrainian project of reconstruction would look like, they just abstain from this discussion. And so European liberals and neoliberals frame the project of Ukrainian reconstruction, and our government is totally happy about it. So that's a big, the big problem now, and unfortunately I don't see much progress there. All the programs which are discussed, proposed, all the narrative are about market, competition, investments, and so on. There is very little to say about the fact that we have heavily damaged, destroyed parts of country, at least. We have a destroyed economy, and we have a numerous vulnerable groups or groups who lost like their homes, their belongings, their jobs, like any social, they don't have access to social security, they have disabilities caused by war, for example, or they lost relatives who were providing for their families, and there is basically nothing proposed how to make life of these groups of people bearable now and promising in the future, that there will be place for supporting them in this future reconstruction. That's unfortunately what is not there. So anyway, when the war will be over in this or another way, we will have a totally different society and totally different economy. Like the demography will be totally different. It's already different now. We don't know how much it's different now because there is no statistics. There was no statistics before the full-scale invasion, by the way. So we will have totally different society and totally different economy, because part of economy will be destroyed. Mostly industrial economy, which is a huge problem, because it means that even like Ukraine was going through the process of deindustrialization, like many post-Soviet countries after the Soviet Union collapse, this war brought this deindustrialization to the extreme. So like the factories are destroyed and so on and so forth. And it looks like there is no prospects and no ideas how to recreate or create a high value added economy. And if you don't have a high value added economy, if you have export oriented economy with just export raw materials, agricultural production, it means that you don't have resources to provide social security, social support inside the country, because if you have low added value, it means you have less taxes which stay inside the country, and which means that the welfare state cannot be built on that. So I mean, our government is definitely not planning to build a welfare state anyway. So these are the things which are bad, and on that we can potentially build the vision of how it should be. So we should think how we can imagine the future Ukrainian economy, whether it will be like a super agricultural country our government has been, and previous governments have been talking about for years. Of course, this is not a sustainable solution for a country with a population with such a demography, which we would have now. And this would be crucial, because so what we need, basically, we need some kind of green industrialization, which is not even discussed beyond the cycle of activists and some progressive scholars. Like, this is not on the table, this is not even discussed. And so we need this kind of green industrialization on total, of course, preferably different principles of energy than we had before, which would be not extremely damaging to environment, because we already will have a huge problems with environment because of war, because of Russian invasion. So these are things which should be at least discussed in a way. And I think that to make this green reindustrialization in a way, we need a very strong intervention on the side of the state. And this again is not what is planned, definitely. I mean, for Ukrainian, for the vision coming from government and from Western liberals, it's like the state should be kept small, and yeah, so this usual shit which they are speaking about economy and state. So we need a big intervention on the side of the state, and we need to build a social security which would support people those groups which have been always there, like single mothers and I don't know, like elderly people, and at the same time those new groups which unfortunately are created due to Russian invasion.
Thank you for putting all that into perspective. Even with this dimension of green economy that I really like that you mentioned, I had this experience particularly in European Parliament when we had this situation, for example, that EU so-called green transition is based on, for example, mining lithium in countries like Serbia by companies like Rio Tinto, and then offloading and dumping used batteries in countries like Ghana. So we try to engage with them and discuss that, but as you were saying, like there is very little political will, if not at all, to address this capitalist way of capitalist version of green economy. So we'll definitely need to deal with that as well. But I'm wondering if Julie has something to share with us in terms of experience from UK, like what proved to be successful even on a small scale level, but helps you make manuring space and mobilize people around these issues.
Okay, it's really important that we build alliances with other movements. I don't think we can win a lot of these battles by ourselves. It's too lonely, and there's so many issues which interconnect, and we have to join up those dots. And the more that we can bring people together to see that injustice, like one injustice hurts everybody. Some of these things, we've been saying them for years, but now they're happening in practice. So I really feel, I talked a little bit about being part of this campaign to shut down this women's detention centre, and it's a very grassroots action. Every month we are there at the gates to this horrendous prison, and more people are joining the campaign, and they're coming from different sections of life and society and community. And actually we can talk about all sorts of things in that space now. We've been campaigning to do this for 2.5 years, and we're absolutely committed to it until we shut it down. And I found incredible kind of comfort, I think, and solidarity and sisterhood within that space. And we've been able to have some really difficult conversations, because not everybody is on the same page about Ukraine, for example, or about Gaza. And yet in that space, at that there's a kind of mutual respect that comes from the fact that we've committed to taking a really practical action, and everything that we do is really creative. So we have choirs, we make orange hearts and we put them on the fences, we have musicians, we have poems, so I think that kind of really practical way of working on something in your own backyard, on your doorstep, is really, really important. And if I, and I said that it includes women and so it includes women and men, but lots of women. We are coming from all those different parts of society, and we're learning about each other's perspectives. So we must keep doing that. I really feel we have to bring more men on the journey with us. We have to do that. We have to, I'm still in the Labour Party, even though I'm really angry with the Labour Party about so many things. And every morning I wake up and I want to rip up my membership card, but I don't do it, because to do that is to vacate the space. And we can't vacate the space. We have to be in that space, and we have to have more people with us in that space, and so we have to also educate our men. So I am the mother of 2 boys. I am the grandmother of 2 tiny little boys. And my two boys are feminists, and my 2 little grandsons will be feminists. And we have to make sure that they completely understand what feminism is, and that it isn't about them. It's not, we can all be in that space together, because when women are at the table, everybody wins. Life is better for everybody. And that's also a really important perspective to have when we're trying to make economic policy, when we're trying to change laws, when we're trying to look at the big picture. Because the most diverse societies are the most successful societies. So the more that people want to narrow who can have stuff in society, who can have power, for example, the least successful our societies will be. So I would say, find your allies, work with people at all those levels, all the way up and all the way down. Push for diversity, use creativity, humor, joy, so the opportunities to socialize like you're doing here. Celebrate every win and mark it every year. Don't forget, to continually remind people about all the amazing things that we have done and the achievements that we have made. International Women's Day just used to be one day, didn't it? Like March the 8th. Now it's a whole month, right? The whole of the month of March is now International Women's Day, and we celebrate it and mark it, and we have all kinds of events. So that's really important. And I just, we have to be laying the ground for when people like us are in power again. We have to just lay out the ground. We have to make the case now. So one of the things that I do, I'm on the editorial board of Chartist magazine, and we are commissioning articles which are really rigorous, which are well researched, which are trying to lay out the policies that we believe the left should have, the internationalist, the progressive international policies that we believe Labour and its sister parties should have. And we have a really strong position on Ukraine, and I'm really, really proud of that. And if there's anybody here, I'll put the link in the chat to Chartist magazine. Please subscribe to it. You can read it online, but we also print a version every 2 months. We do book reviews, we do film reviews. And when I went on the editorial board, I wanted more women and more young people writing for us. And I just think, you know, like wherever you are, just be kind of waving that flag, saying we need to be in those spaces. And I just want to say one last thing, which is to Vicky. You know, we've like worked together on this really hard, and it is really tough. And you know, my heart goes out to you, and I'm with you in this, because I used to think I was a pacifist, and then the war started, and I realized that I wanted my friends to win. And when you think about it from that perspective, actually, it's quite easy to make that shift. Yeah, our friends must win. They have to win, and they're winning for us. So it's I don't feel, yeah, I feel like I can justify my position. And sure, I don't want, you know, I'm anti-nuclear. I would rather money was spent on other things, but that has to come afterwards. Ukraine has to win first. And all the women that I know in Ukraine, you know, they support the war. So I support the war, and I support arms to make that success possible.
Thank you, Julie. So yeah, so many emotions on the table and so many issues to deal with, but there is energy and there is appetite, and of course it is existential thing first of all. So I would invite everybody, if they want, though you already touched on this, to share some final remarks about moving forward, reimagining our economies, our societies, building our future in more just way that, as you were saying, is based on solidarity, is not based on competition, not on exploitation or extraction. So how to rebuild ourselves as humans, as societies, and globally, of course, in current, I mean, we are starting from current geopolitical situation. And I know that Julie and Vicky and Oksana already mentioned some fragments, like how to resonate with people. But if you have something that you did not have chance to share so far, now is the time. And then we are going to open floor for people. I see that already there is rich exchange in the chat, which is great. And for me, it resembles to what, not to kitchen, but more to kafana, which is like, I don't know if you know in other Slavic languages what kafana is, but basically it's not cafe, it's more than cafe. It has this cultural layer in it when you come drink with people and exchange very passionately with things what you do and what you want to do. So I feel that now we are in kafana. If you want to drink, feel free to do that as well. But let's hear like final remarks from our speakers, if you want. Maybe Vicky want to start, and then Oksana, because I know that she has some limits time-wise, and then Julie. If not, we can open space for others. Feel free to raise your hands, and we can open the floor. So Vicky, do you want to start to share something?
I'll try. I feel like I was more articulate when I was writing things in the chat than I was verbally, so it's a really tough day, and my mum's not very well. But I think that many of us just want to be able to act and to be able to make things better. And there's like a real energy in activism when it's going well and you can bring people together and move forwards. And then this thing that we do talk about, but perhaps we don't come up with solutions for, it is what happens when everyone is exhausted and feeling quite broken, and how do we extend solidarity and generosity to each other without losing sight of where we need to get to and what we need to do. And just looking in the chat where we're talking about, you know, the situation in Ukraine is so real that if we are not able to have really meaningful international solidarity with Ukraine, like it could be too late. And I think that's really stark. And I think that reminder needs to somehow fuel both our resolve and determination to do everything that we can to help each other. But it also has to come with the knowledge that we can't just shout at each other to make that happen, that there has to be space for generosity towards each other and for listening, and that really, as a member of an education union, as an educator, like I think that is actually integral to what education maybe isn't always about in the current circumstances in a lot of classrooms, but it's what it should be about. And it's about taking our own responsibility for education of ourselves, but also in taking responsibility for participating in dialogue. Maybe dialogue over debate sometimes is the way of kind of making progress in terms of changing people's minds and kind of building something a bit better. So I'm still not sure that was very clear, but I hope you know what I mean. Thanks.
Oksana, do you want to share something?
Yes, thank you. I will try to be brief. I think, I mean, people on the left probably should try to be consistent in opposition to authoritarian regimes, to imperialisms, to colonial aggressions, attacks, systems of oppression, various other systems of oppression, exploitation, and so on. So, I mean, either in Ukraine or, I don't know, US or India or Iran or Palestine. Unfortunately, this is very hard now because we are living in a very, I mean, we are living in history, basically. So we are living through the period when forces which we thought probably would never come back to life again. So we have the imperial struggles renewing because of the decline of US hegemony, obviously. So this is not the best circumstances to be consistent. It's hard to be consistent, actually. It's not that, I mean, and some people, of course, cannot do it for various reasons. So in these circumstances, it's, I mean, today we were talking about some victories and effective solidarities, practical solidarities, about some sensitive communication between people. It's possible. We know all about it. Like victories are possible, and this all are possible. The question is whether we can upscale them. Maybe we cannot. Maybe it's just not the right moment of history. So that's my feeling now, that we are living in a kind of reactionary period, and to upscale the things is really hard, maybe impossible. So what I do try to believe in now, because you have to believe in something even if you're a pessimist and the fatalist, like I'm always saying that I believe in people-to-people solidarity, or how other speakers were naming it as a peer-to-peer or minority-to-minority solidarities, which maybe are yet impossible to upscale. But I think we should build these connections. We should continue these dialogues and communications, understanding that maybe we're just doing work for the future. It's not for now. I mean, maybe we cannot change something substantially now on a bigger level, but I think because some of us are activists, we have to do something. So that's probably the things to do. Keep it in mind that maybe at some point of history it will be useful and make a change.
I want quality, inclusive democracy, and I don't see that we have it here in the UK, and I don't think it exists in many places. And we should really interrogate that word democracy. I'm so fed up with people believing that democracy is just something that happens every few years when you go to the ballot box and then you forget about it. And we have to teach democracy in our schools, in our youth clubs, you know, it has to be better in trade unions. You know, it's not super in trade unions either. And we should be looking at trying to improve an understanding of what quality and inclusive democracy is, and make sure that more people can participate in it. Those of us who, you know, achieved positions, I never thought I would ever do something like become an MEP, but I did. And then I didn't kick that ladder away from me. I held out my hand and tried to bring more women up to learn, actually, and to see that they also could have a voice and a seat at the table. And it's how we do that, I think, that's really important. So simple things like I instituted job shadowing, which is not about unpaid interns doing rubbish jobs like filing. It was actually about saying to women, and particularly young women, but to women from all walks of life, come into the Parliament, come into my office, come and see how power works, come and see what happens, ask me about it, don't do the rubbish jobs, but, like, you know, observe it. And I'm really proud that one of the people who job shadowed me for 2 weeks was a young Afghan refugee woman who had got status in Sweden and then went on to study law in Uppsala. And actually, that has to be a real, you know, I'm so proud of that. If I'm not proud of anything else that I did as an MEP, I'm really proud that one person's lives may have been transformed by exposure, actually, to the structures of power. So she could see how she could also operate, and the things, you know, use her intelligence and her lived experience in order to try and change things for other people.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Vicky. Thank you, Oksana. Maybe Viktoriia can give us like some final overview, some final remarks of the artistic part.
This Vietnamka, this cutout, it's like unpredictable, because when we draw, we think that we understand what will we get, but in fact, it's always surprising, and it's one of these good sides of this technique. And in Ukraine, it was like started being popular maybe even in 16th century, but among rich people, and maybe in 19th century it when paper became like affordable, available for simple people, it became popular among many people, and it was like usual kind of decorating the house, like angels, birds, doves, something like to make your house more light and more happy and to fill it with harmony. So I hope that if you tried to do it, you also felt a bit more of harmony today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know that you're going to make a beautiful collage after it, and we deeply appreciate your artistic touch and support to guide us through this super difficult question.